The laughter began with the smoke. Not because there was too much of it, because there was any at all. People driving past the abandoned furnace hill stopped their wagons and stared at the thin gray column rising into winter air. For nearly 30 years the old iron furnace had sat empty at the edge of Briar Hollow. Cold, dead, forgotten. Children avoided it because stories spread about strange sounds inside at night. Hunters used it as a landmark when crossing the forest ridge. Most people barely thought about it anymore, until smoke started rising from its chimney again. That was when rumors started. Then came the truth. Nathan Hale had moved his family inside it. The entire valley laughed. A furnace? You planning on smelting iron or raising children? Man finally lost his mind. Harlan Pike nearly dropped his grain sack laughing outside the trading post. He moved his wife and children into a giant stove. That became the joke for weeks. Nathan's giant stove. Children repeated it whenever they passed the hill. Adults repeated it because they thought it was clever. Nathan ignored all of them, because unlike most people in Briar Hollow, Nathan knew exactly what that furnace was. Most saw ruins. He saw thermal mass. That wasn't a word people used often in the valley, but Nathan understood it. Years earlier, he had worked restoration crews rebuilding industrial sites farther east where old furnaces and kiln systems still stood. During winter, he noticed something strange. The massive furnace walls stayed warm long after fires died. Sometimes all night. Sometimes longer. Stone and iron absorbed enormous amounts of heat energy and released it slowly. The effect fascinated him, because winter survival usually worked the opposite way. People built cabins that heated quickly, then cooled quickly. Constant fires. Constant fuel. Constant fighting. Nathan hated fighting winter, especially after the winter before. That year nearly ruined his family. Their cabin looked sturdy enough. Log walls. Stone chimney. Proper roof. But winter found every weakness immediately. Wind crept through corners. Floorboards froze. The stove consumed wood endlessly while temperatures still dropped overnight. Nathan remembered waking 3 separate nights to find ice forming inside window edges despite feeding the fire constantly. Worst of all, his youngest daughter Emma developed a hard cough that refused to leave. Sarah, his wife, never complained openly. But Nathan saw exhaustion in her face every morning. By spring he made himself a promise. Never again. Then summer brought opportunity. The abandoned furnace sat several miles outside town near old iron fields nobody used anymore. Huge stone walls nearly 12 feet thick surrounded the original furnace chamber, while heavy brick tunnels extended through sections beneath the structure. Most considered demolition impossible. Nathan saw possibility instead. He bought the property cheaply. People thought he was joking, until wagons started moving uphill. Beds, tools, blankets, food, windows, doors, everything. Then the laughter returned worse than before. Caleb Turner visited first after hearing rumors. He rode uphill one afternoon expecting madness. Instead, he found Nathan standing beside the furnace entrance, fitting heavy timber around a new doorway. Caleb stopped completely, because the structure looked enormous. The abandoned furnace rose from the hillside like a giant stone tower with sloping walls thicker than most cabins were wide. What exactly are you doing? Nathan hammered another support peg into place. Moving in. Caleb stared. No, seriously. Nathan smiled. Seriously. The furnace originally processed iron decades earlier. Massive stone and brick walls surrounded a central heating chamber designed specifically to contain extraordinary temperatures safely. Nathan wasn't rebuilding the furnace. He was adapting it. That mattered. The lower chamber became storage and food space where temperatures remained stable naturally. Upper sections became living areas. Small insulated rooms went inside larger chambers. Ventilation shafts became chimney systems. Windows cut into selected sections brought in light. Every change served one purpose. Pulled warmth. Nathan explained while showing Caleb around. The problem with cabins isn't making heat. Caleb frowned. Then what is? Keeping it. He knocked gently against one of the furnace walls. The sound barely echoed. These walls absorb heat slowly. Caleb pressed one hand against the stone surface. Cold. Solid. Immovable. And that helps. Nathan nodded. Once they warm, they stay warm. Caleb looked uncertain, because the place still looked strange. Very strange. Living inside a furnace sounded ridiculous no matter how Nathan explained it. But Nathan understood something the valley didn't. Winter wasn't only about temperature. It was about stability. Massive materials resisted sudden change naturally. Thin walls reacted immediately. Heavy walls reacted slowly. That difference changed everything. Construction continued through autumn. Nathan sealed cracks between stone with lime mortar. Interior timber rooms insulated living spaces from bare surfaces. Warm air circulation paths moved heat naturally through connected sections. By November, the transformation looked unbelievable. The old furnace no longer felt abandoned. Lantern light glowed from windows. Smoke rose steadily overhead. Children's voices echoed from inside. Even Sarah finally smiled again. That alone made every hour worthwhile. The first hard freeze arrived early. Northern winds swept through Briar Hollow, carrying sharp temperatures behind it. Families prepared normally. More wood, more blankets, more repairs. Nathan watched carefully, especially inside the furnace. The first changes appeared after only several nights. Heat behaved differently. The stove warmed living areas normally, but something else happened afterward. Hours later, warmth remained. Not because fires stayed larger, because the walls slowly absorbed heat during the day and released it gradually back into surrounding spaces through the night. The temperature barely swung at all. Morning felt almost like evening. Even Emma stopped coughing as often. Caleb noticed during another visit. He stepped inside after sunset and frowned immediately. The fire burned low, very low, yet the rooms still felt comfortable. "How much wood are you burning?" Nathan looked up from repairing a chair. "Less than before." Caleb stared around slowly. "That shouldn't be possible." Nathan tapped one of the thick interior stone walls beside him. "The walls are helping now." Caleb pressed his palm carefully against the stone. Not warm exactly, but not freezing either. The surface felt strangely stable, like it wasn't reacting to weather outside at all. Word spread quietly afterward. Not enough to stop the jokes, but enough that people began paying attention. Because Nathan used less firewood. Much less. Even Harlan noticed eventually, though he refused to admit concern openly. Then December arrived, and with it came strange weather from the north. Old ranchers stopped smiling. The pressure dropped. Birds vanished. The air changed. People started talking about storms. Bad storms. Maybe the worst winter in decades. Nathan looked toward the mountains one evening while smoke drifted above the furnace hill. Then he quietly started bringing more supplies inside. 3 nights later, snow began falling. The snow began quietly. Small flakes drifted across Briar Hollow beneath a pale gray sky, while people carried extra wood beside cabin doors and tight shutters closed against growing wind. Nobody worried at first. Winter always began with snow. Then temperatures dropped. Fast. By the second morning, ice formed thick across water troughs. By evening, tree branches cracked sharply in distant woods as frozen sap expanded beneath bark. Old ranchers stopped talking entirely. Nathan noticed that. People ignored weather reports. People ignored rumors. But when old ranchers went silent, trouble usually followed. The third night brought wind. Deep mountain wind rolling down through the valley like a living thing. Cabins creaked. Loose boards rattled. Smoke flattened against rooftops instead of rising. And by dawn, Briar Hollow had disappeared. Snow moved sideways hard enough to erase buildings beyond 50 yards. Fence lines vanished beneath drifts while chimneys struggled to pull air through freezing gusts. Inside the old furnace home, Nathan sat quietly beside the stove listening. Not to the storm, to the walls. Because buildings always spoke during hard weather. Cabins groaned. Roofs shifted. Weak beams complained. The furnace barely made a sound. That frightened him more than if it shook violently. Because it meant the structure simply didn't care. 12-foot walls absorbed the storm the way cliffs absorbed rain. Wind struck stone and disappeared. Heat behaved differently too. The stove burned lower than usual, yet warmth still surrounded the living space steadily. The massive furnace walls had spent weeks collecting heat from daily fires. Now they released it slowly back into the rooms. The whole building had become a giant thermal battery. Emma noticed first. She looked up from her blankets. "Papa," Nathan smiled softly. "Yes." "The fire's getting smaller." Nathan glanced toward the stove. Only a few glowing coals remained. "It is." Emma frowned. "But we're still warm." Nathan looked toward the stone walls. Because the house remembered. Emma didn't understand. Neither did most adults. But before Nathan could explain, pounding struck the outer door. Everyone froze. Another pounding followed. Nathan opened against screaming wind and nearly lost his footing immediately. Caleb Turner stumbled inside, carrying his younger brother, while snow exploded across the entryway. Nathan forced the heavy door shut. For several moments, Caleb simply stood there breathing hard. Then he looked around. The fire barely burned. Yet the room felt stable. Warm. Safe. How? He asked quietly. Nathan handed blankets toward his brother. The walls are working. Caleb stared. Then came another knock. And another. Harlan Pike arrived with his wife after snow collapsed part of their roof. Mrs. Tolland appeared carrying her grandson beneath quilts. Then came the Millers. By midnight, nearly a dozen people crowded inside Nathan's strange furnace home. Nobody laughed anymore. Outside, the storm grew worse. Snow buried windows. Wind forced itself through cracks in ordinary cabins faster than stoves could replace lost heat. Some roofs began collecting dangerous weight, while families fought constantly to keep fires alive. Inside the furnace, something remarkable happened. The temperature barely changed. Hours passed. The fire burned modestly. Still the warmth remained, because every stone surrounding them released stored heat gradually back into the air. Not dramatically, steadily, like sunlight trapped inside rock. Caleb finally stood beside one interior wall and pressed both hands against it. His eyes widened. It isn't cold. Nathan nodded. Exactly, but it's stone. Stone changes slowly. Harlan looked around uneasily. All these years. Nathan glanced toward him. Harlan shook his head. We thought keeping warm meant bigger fires. Nathan added another small piece of wood onto the coals. No. Everyone looked toward him. It means losing less heat. Silence settled across the room. Because outside, people had spent years fighting winter harder. More wood. More fire. More effort. Nathan's furnace did something different. It slowed winter down. For 3 days the blizzard continued. 3 endless days of screaming wind and drifting snow. Inside the furnace home, children slept comfortably while adults sat beside lantern light listening to storms they could barely hear through the walls. The structure simply endured. Not resisting. Not struggling. Existing. When the storm finally weakened, Nathan opened the heavy entrance carefully. No one moved behind him. People suddenly feared seeing what remained. Outside, Briar Hollow looked broken. Several cabins had partially collapsed. Sheds disappeared beneath drifts. One chimney lay shattered across buried roads. But the furnace still stood exactly where it always had. Snow covered sections of the outer walls. Smoke rose quietly from above. The structure looked almost untouched. Word spread through Briar Hollow quickly after roads reopened. People climbed the furnace hill simply to see it. They expected giant furnaces still burning inside. Hidden machines. Massive fires. Instead, they found ordinary rooms inside extraordinary walls. Questions came immediately. How thick should stone be? Would brick work? Could heavy materials help existing homes? Nathan answered patiently. Because winter already answered better than he ever could. By spring, families began changing things. Stone storage rooms. Heat retaining walls. Smaller insulated spaces inside larger homes. Nobody called it Nathan's giant stove anymore. The storm ended that permanently. One evening, Caleb stood outside the furnace hill watching sunlight settle across the valley. You know what bothers people most now? He asked. Nathan smiled faintly. What? Caleb looked toward the massive stone structure. They laughed because they thought you moved your family into a furnace. He paused. Turns out you moved them into the one place winter couldn't cool down.